Hello and welcome to season one finale of Mind Wars Forum. Today we've got a really special episode. We're going to be talking with the creators of the play Coal Country, Jessica Blank and Erik Jenson, and also musician Steve Earle, who has a new album out called Ghosts of West Virginia, and additionally he did the music for the play Coal Country. And so we're going to be talking about this play because it memorializes the Upper Big Branch disaster, which, while this year is also the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Matewan, this is the 10th anniversary of the Upper Big Branch mining disaster. And as our museum members know, we did a miners' memorial temporary exhibit that is now traveling in various places around West Virginia. And so mining accidents is a huge part of the culture of mining, the occupation of mining, and also it is heavily involved in the union struggles that have been prevalent throughout the history of the mine wars and anywhere that people dig coal. And so we're going to be looking at how we memorialize mining disasters, the role that unions have to play in improving health and safety conditions for miners, and how that is perceived in art and in plays and in music. So we hope that you enjoy the season finale of Mind Wars Forum, and we hope that all of our members and the people that are watching will donate to the museum and help support this work. Go to our online store, buy a t-shirt, buy a mug, buy a ball cap, buy a red bandana, something that helps keep the museum going and helps us continue to bring this type of programming to you. So we want to thank everybody that has supported the museum and has supported this program, and we hope that you will continue to do so in the future. So now, here is episode 7 of Mind Wars Forum. All right, guys, well, welcome. This is episode 7 of our Mind Wars Forum, and this is our season finale, so I'm really happy to be finishing things off with you guys, that we can do the panel that we were supposed to do in New York way back in March before everything went crazy, but we certainly have a lot to talk about as a result of this. So really thrilled that you guys came on. So I want to thank Jessica and Erik and Steve for coming on here. So this play Coal Country, let's talk about the play first. Our museum members and the people that follow our museum are well versed in the idea of coal country disasters. We've lived it, we've seen it, we've got the memorials, it's a part of life down here. And so you guys are doing this play called Coal Country that debuted a few months ago in New York. First of all, just tell us about the play in general and give everyone a little bit of a synopsis.
Great. Yeah, so Erik and I make what's called documentary theater, which means that we go and we interview people and we record the audio. We have the audio transcribed, and then the text of the play is actually constructed from the interview transcripts, right? So we're not making anything up.
It's in the voices of the people that we spoke to.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't say it's exactly journalism, but it pulls a lot from journalism, and it's kind of, you know, a combination of journalism and art is the idea, right?
Okay.
So we've made several plays like this around different subjects over the years. And when the UBB disaster was unfolding, we, like everyone else in the country, we were watching it on the news and watching the coverage and really moved and affected and upset by what was happening.
I'm from rural Minnesota, and you know, it's a long ways from West Virginia to Minnesota, but like any of those guys could have been guys that I went fishing with or went to high school with. They could have been my uncles, my dad. You know, our rural life is interesting. You know everybody. You know, everybody knows everyone.
And so there was definitely like
the idea of a small community being impacted that way really affected me deeply.
And so I remember actually when we were watching coverage on the news at the time, we were like, maybe we're very picky about the subject matter when we make documentary theater, because we make other kinds of work, fictional work also in between. We only make one of these plays like every several years. It takes a long time. It's a deep process. And we don't want to make it like sort of issue of the week. It would be very easy to do that with this form. And so we're careful about our subject matter. But we were watching this unfold and we were like, this is a story that's really important. And there's something there. But at the time,
and what happens after the news trucks roll away?
Right, exactly.
Like what's going to happen to this story? So we felt I think we felt a sense of responsibility right from the start.
Yeah. But at the time we had that was April 2010. So we had a 4-month-old baby.
Right.
So we weren't in a position to embark on the research process for a new play at the time. So we just sort of put a pin in it, but the idea didn't go away. And so, by the time she was bigger and, 4 years later, something like that, we were still talking about it and we were still thinking about it. And we started then talking about it in earnest. And Erik was like, I think if we do this, it needs to have music. Like, I don't think this is a story that can be told without music.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we had that conversation, we were like, we have to call Steve.
Gotta call Steve.
Yeah. I like it that you mentioned that about music. West Virginia is a really musical place. Everybody plays an instrument where I live. Everybody. I grew up with it. It's everybody plays at least one instrument, it seems like. And you can find good musicianship everywhere you turn.
Some of the best players I know are from West Virginia. A lot of friends of mine are from there, or from, just the other side of the Pennsylvania border, and or just west. And it's it's this kind of music that, I grew up in Texas. My mom's from Tennessee. So I came to Tennessee when I was growing up, and I went to Grand Ole and I saw Bill Monroe when I was 7 years old. And I was always interested, but, I saw more, Willie Nelson and Ray Price and that kind of country music where I was growing up until I moved to Nashville when I was 19. And I already knew Towns Van Zandt, which gave me an introduction to Guy Clark. And Guy Clark's next door neighbor was Buck White. And the girls were still in high school. And Jerry Douglas was in the band. And Jerry and I were the same age. And I met Sam Bush almost to me. And I met John Hartford, who was another one of my teachers. So I started getting kind of a crash course in music that came from the eastern part of the United States, and most of it from the mountains, and a lot of it had to do with coal. So by the time it took me to 1999 to get the nerve to make, a bluegrass record, I was always fascinated with it, wanted to do it. I made Trade It Coming before that, which was, almost that. It was Norman Blake and Roy Husky Jr. and Peter Rowan. It was a pretty good band, but bluegrass is hard. Mm-hmm. It's not closer to bebop than it is anything else. It's a super, super high level of musicianship. And, and it comes from a do-it-yourself mentality is where it's born. Now, then it went on to be this really advanced, type of music that not everybody can play. But I've met more people that can play at that level, in those mountains than I have any place else. Is where it comes from.
Yeah. There's some great musicianship. Now, I know you've been to West Virginia a number of times. You played Mountain Stage, I believe, haven't you, a couple times in the past?
Pretty much every record cycle at least since I got out of jail in the mid-'90s, Mountain Stage sort of became I was in Mountain Stage the day that I'll never forget it. I was doing Mountain Stage the day that Dale Earnhardt got killed. Mm. And then Sundays, it always tapes on Sundays, and it was like, I'll never forget that all those crew guys sitting around television set watching the race, and that happened. And I just happened to be standing there. And I've known those guys, and I've known Larry Gross for a long time. And, of course, now Kathy Mattea's there. Kathy and I signed our first record deals on the same day. She used to sing all my demos. So I've known Kathy for 40 years, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, Kathy's great. She came down to support our protest march to save the Blair Mountain Battlefield. Back in 2011, so she's been very active in the region.
She made her own record about coal that's really, really, really good, really good.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, she does have a good record out there about that. So I know you've been to West Virginia and played. Jessica and Erik, had you all been to West Virginia before you heard about the Upper Big Branch disaster? Was it?
Nope.
I had a little bit because I grew up in and outside of Washington, D.C., so we had been to the mountains, and I knew the land a little bit, but I didn't know the people.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, really our introduction, actually my introduction to West Virginia for real was I went down there for Don Blankenship's sentencing. Because before we went to do the interviews, because we had been trying to reach people and trying to, get in touch with families. And I had, I'd made some connections with folks in the community, and they, had talked to some of the family members who said, yeah, sure, we'll talk to them. But I wasn't getting my calls returned, and I couldn't figure it out. I was like, these folks say they want to talk to us, but I'm calling and then I'm not reaching them.
Gotta show your face.
And I was like, I think I have to show my face.
Yeah.
Like, I think, I was like, I think I have to show up. And it so happened that was around the time of Blankenship's sentencing. And so I just went down there, sat in the courtroom. So that was a little bit of a crash course that day. And then we went back a couple months later to do the interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, Blankenship is kind of this overarching figure in the Southern coal fields, particularly in the kind of what I like to refer to as the last phase of coal dominance in West Virginia, because we're really at the end days of the dominance of coal in the area. And he was kind of the last of the old school coal bosses that go back to guys like Justice Collins in the 1890s and early 1900s. Blankenship, I've got a lot of Blankenship stories, but he came to our museum, the Mine Wars Museum, the week after it opened, the weekend after it, and it was just me and our staff member there. It was our first open Saturday since our grand opening, and I was with our staff member just to see that he was going to do okay. And Blankenship pulls up in like a convertible, like 68 Bel Air baby blue convertible, and comes in and spends an hour in our museum taking pictures of everything. And this is the man that did more to destroy the Union than anybody else in the last 80 years of West Virginia history. And he despised the very existence of that museum. So it was really interesting to see him there taking pictures of every single thing in there. He and I had a really interesting chat once he got through the exhibits, but that's another conversation for another time.
I have my Don Blankenship.
What now?
I have my thoughts about Don Blankenship.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have thoughts about him down here. He, what was it about this specific disaster? You mentioned you came down for the sentencing, and you met a few of the people, and I know some of the people, at least one person that's in the play, or one character in the play, was in the film Blood on the Mountain. Is that correct?
Who are you thinking of?
That was Dr. Judy.
Yeah, Judy.
Yeah.
Yeah. We hadn't seen that. We hadn't seen that documentary.
I actually sat next to the filmmaker whose name, Mary Lynn.
Yeah, Mary Lynn.
At the sentencing.
Mm-hmm.
And we started talking just by accident. We sat next to each other. But we hadn't seen it. I'm not sure if it was out yet.
Yeah.
But we've seen it since.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What was it though about Upper Big Branch? I mean, there's a lot of disasters. You could have picked a lot of disasters. You could have gone Flint. You could have gone with Katrina. You could have gone with Puerto Rico recently. I mean, there's lots of disasters to choose from. What was it about this one that spoke to you?
I think that's a good question.
Well, I grew up working poor, and then we managed to, scrabble our way up to working middle class, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. Ish. I grew up, and I also grew up in farm country in northern Minnesota. And, I grew up around men who knew their way around machines and who worked with their hands. And my grandfather was a farmer and a mechanic and had had 4 tractors that, he wanted to give me one of them. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with the tractor in New York.
Yeah, you can't do anything with tractor in Brooklyn.
But I really felt connected in that way, and I've always had respect for people who work with their hands and who work hard, and and that I don't, that got me, and also the other thing that got me, the reason that I wanted to do the play was I don't think that the families were allowed the dignity of their grief by a lot of people.
Right.
And that made me angry. So that's, I'm not a very angry person. I don't show anger very often, but my anger was pretty high when I saw that.
And I think too, with I was saying before that we're pretty selective with what subjects we do this kind of work around. And one of the things that we're always looking for are, of course, stories that are important, right, and compelling and necessary, but also stories where we see that there's like a conversation that's stuck, right? Where something that's like politically polarized that doesn't have to be, right? So like our first documentary play was a play called The Exonerated, which was based on interviews we did with death row exonerees, right? So like you can look at the conversation around the death penalty as one of these things, right? It's like at that time, the conversation was totally stuck. It was like on one side, people saying it's wrong for the state to kill anybody ever, morally, period, right? Pure abolitionist from an ethical perspective, which is where we are coming from philosophically, which is great, but that's a philosophical perspective. Other side, if you kill somebody, you forfeit the right to your own life, philosophically, right? And it was stuck, right? Until the people who started talking about innocence in the death penalty came along, and they were like, look, if we talk about the fact that people who are innocent get sent to death row, all of us can all probably morally agree, or most of us, that that's wrong. Right. So let's start the conversation there and go through the emotional experience of what that does to somebody and look at the implications, and maybe that can expand, right? So with all of our documentary plays, we're looking for things that can do that. And we saw in the UBB story, there's, obviously there's a really polarized, like politically polarized binary conversation around like coal is bad or coal is good. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, but how about the people whose bodies are in the middle of it?
Right.
Like there's an entry point there where people who seemingly disagree radically from a political standpoint can actually get on the same page from a human being standpoint and start to have a conversation. And we saw that in this story.
So did Steve, I think.
Yeah, so you want to start the conversation.
I was a member of that anti-death penalty movement. That's how I met Jessica and Erik. And I helped produce a couple of readings of The Exonerated. And I was in it as an actor twice. But that movement was divided between people that thought that thought you had to be, that they didn't want to hear about anything but a purist, like objection to the death penalty. My objection to the death penalty was pretty pure, but pretty personal. I object to the death penalty because if the state kills people, and that's ostensibly, this is a democracy. If the state kills people, I'm killing people, and I object to the damage that does to my spirit without my consent. That's basically what it was about for me. So, but I was always this is not a left of center country. This is a right of center country. And I've never lost sight of that. And I'm okay with that. I don't expect it to ever be anything else. It's a big country. Not everybody gets to travel and see the world the way that I do. I know things that I know because I've seen a lot of places, and I've seen pretty much every square yard of this country, most of this. I've played in all 50 states. And I know that, the record that I was waiting for a chance to make a record that spoke to, I've made the Preaching to the Choir record several times, and my politics have not changed at all. I think coal's bad for the environment. I think oil's bad for the environment, and I'm from fucking Texas, but it's not, a lot of people I grew up with worked in oil. The only people I knew that had anything worked in oil that didn't go to college. And I didn't go to college. So it was just that idea. I've always known that people, we're fond of saying people vote their pocketbooks. That's not what they're doing. They're voting their hearts. They're voting their families. They're voting their lives. And that politics are that simple to people. If you want to, like if somebody from outside of West Virginia looks at West Virginia as this hardcore red state, that's not true. West Virginia pretty fucking purple historically, and that's because of trade unions and because of coal. So none of these things are that simple. So it's the last great unionized place in America was the coal industry in West Virginia. Now that was because of the kind of coal that's in West Virginia and the high value of it made the union a little bit more powerful and for a little bit more than it was in Kentucky. I'd already written The Mountain and Harlan Man, a little mini suite as part of the bluegrass record I made. I was always aware of this, but you know, why did West Virginia go for Trump? Pretty simple. Hillary Clinton went to West Virginia and said, I'm going to close the coal mines. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump went back and said, I'm not going to close the coal mines. Truth is they were both fucking lying. And neither person has the power to close coal mines. Everybody that knows anything about it knows for sure. And even a lot of people in West Virginia that kind of lived and breathed coal all their lives know what determines whether coal mines open and close is the market for coal, the price of coal. Right. And human beings, the trade unions exist to keep human beings from becoming just a component, you know, in the process of getting coal out of the ground. And it's like in other dangerous jobs. And I think, you know, until people, and this was my favorite thing about this project, was people, I don't know how many people saw coal before it closed. We were trying to figure it out together. That's 240 people, you know, every night. 26 performances, I think, is the correct count, counting the previews. And most of the seats were full. So whoever made that, those people, the New Yorkers there, and they were New York theater artists, they know more about West Virginia. And they know more about coal than they did before. And that's the reason for doing this. So I believe, personally, if people in West Virginia don't learn a little bit more about people in New York, if people in New York don't learn more about people in West Virginia, those are just, you know, 2 of the 50 states, then we're in trouble. And people that have been dismantling the Constitution, that have been doing things that they wanted to do for years and years, while we're calling each other names on the fucking internet, they're continuing to do what they do. And so this was a way for me to start a conversation about, you know, for 2 people and 4 people that didn't vote the way that I did, because I feel like it's necessary. I don't think it solves anything overnight. This is chess. It's not checkers. It's just one move. It's a process, and it will take a long time. It took us a long time to get into this trouble.
Right. And, you know, a couple of things. First of all, I didn't see the play, obviously, because I haven't been up there. So I'm a little bit at a disadvantage because I haven't seen it. But I've read reviews of it. I've seen some things online about it, and seen a couple of the YouTube videos you all put up about it. And well, I gather that you talk a lot about unions, or the absence of unions. So that is a big theme, both in the album, you know, Union, God, and Country, obviously, and in the play. This theme of unions, or this theme of the absence of unions. What does the Upper Big Branch experience and the album, the accompanying music, what's the message there about unions and the significance of organized labor in the coal fields and today in general?
Well, I mean, I'm going to steal from Mate One, but I feel like people shouldn't be treated like equipment.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, we got down there to do the interviews, and the first person we sat down with was Gary Quarles. And he walked us
in a big
step by step, yes,
of newspaper clippings
from going back, you know, decades.
Mm-hmm.
And he walked us through step by step the way that Massey Energy had deunionized the Coal River Valley, or that part of the Coal River Valley, which we actually didn't know going into the interviews, right? So we had an idea. We have our own beliefs and politics around unions, and we had ideas about it, but we didn't know until we sat down with Gary how inextricably the history of deunionization is tied to Massey, is tied directly to the UBB disaster. And as we listened to people, it became really clear to us that UBB could never have happened if Massey hadn't deunionized that area first, right? So it's not even some kind of leap that we needed to make philosophically or thematically. To us, it's just part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it really was that simple. The first thing I wrote was Devil Put the Coal on the Ground. And it had a specific purpose when I wrote it, it's just about, it's not coal bad. That's not really the message of that song. The idea of that is more about when you go to West Virginia and you run into guys, I think the idea originally came from looking at Corey Davis's mining helmet, which was still in his truck outside of Tommy's house. And like a lot of those guys, he had the skull with the pick and a shovel on it, all that kind of stuff. It's like, I mean, I got tattoos like that too. It's just that thing, the pride that people take in it, because it's dangerous. Not everybody can do it.
Right.
There are people that are third and fourth generation coal miners that they go down in a mine like their father did and their grandfather did, and they realize very quickly they can't fucking do it. So there's a huge amount of pride in it. There's pride in the fact that we mine the coal that makes the steel that built America, as we know, and fought the wars and won the wars. And so that stuff, you have to take those things into consideration when you're trying to tell these people's stories. And as far as unions go, the next thing I wrote was probably Union God and Country. And because it started with that conversation that Jess and Erik are talking about, because the very first interview I went to was at Gary Quarles. And I sang The Mountain that day. That's how it ended up in the shows. I had my guitar with me, and I sang The Mountain, and everybody that was there cried. And we decided it had to be in the show. It was the one thing I did not write for the show that's in it. But he knew everything, and he was the guy also that spoke for everybody else, because he knew more about coal mining than anybody else among all of the other family members that done put together. And he'd been a union miner all of his life, and he had misgivings about his son being, being a modern non-union coal miner. Mm-hmm. And his son was down there on that long wall too. So, everybody was hearing these things, and everybody that had enough experience in coal mining, every single one of them knew that what was happening at UBB wasn't right. That's a lot of that's in the play, because that's what we heard from people consistently. And, for me, it became very simple. It is wiring into a belief I have in the first place, and that was the first non-union mine on that mountain, and it blew the fuck up. And I think that's why it blew up, plain and simple. If there'd been a union, UMW had been in place doing what it did in the 70s and 80s in that mine, these 29 guys will be alive today. There is no doubt in my mind about that.
Yeah, and to give you some context for all of that, and then next year is the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Blair Mountain. Hope you guys can come down for some of that if you can make it into your schedules. But after the Battle of Blair Mountain took place, of course, you had the 500 plus miners and union leaders that were all charged with treason and murder and all of this. And it bankrupted the UMWA in West Virginia. There were 50,000 West Virginia union coal miners when the Battle of Blair Mountain took place. By the end of the decade, there's less than 1,000. It destroyed the union in West Virginia until FDR's New Deal came along. It was about a 13-year period, just wiped out unions. That decade of the 20s saw the highest level of coal mining deaths in West Virginia history. We averaged over 400 deaths a year in coal mines that decade. I was looking through some of the disasters of the 1920s a few minutes before you guys signed on. It was every 2 or 3 months, 40 people dead, 110 people dead, 25 people. The Upper Big Branch wouldn't have even made a blip in the 20s. That would have just been another explosion. So, and between 1880 and 1920, even before that, West Virginia coal miners suffered a higher proportional death rate than the American military in World War I. So it was safer to go fight the Germans in the trenches than it was to work.
Expeditionary forces, yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, in the expeditionary forces of World War I. Yeah, I've read that statistic before.
Yeah, and there were West Virginians in both World War I and World War II that I've interviewed, coal miners that, that felt that they had a better shot at signing up for the military and surviving than they did if they stayed. And that you were exempt from the draft if you worked in a coal mine in West Virginia. Coal was so important. But people left the coal mines and signed up for the military because they thought it was safer. So, yeah, the Upper Big Branch is, this direct result of this deunionization. And part of what we do with our museum, of course, is try to re-educate the public on the significance of the labor movement. And I think it's also obviously a national issue. You look at meat packers today that don't have unions, that have to work in unsafe conditions due to the coronavirus. They don't have a lot of those health and safety protections because they don't have unions.
Right.
And the union I don't think it's any accident that the union movement in America was reinvigorated in West Virginia with the 2018 teachers strike. And a lot of them wore red bandanas just like the coal miners. So
right after a pandemic, actually. In
What?
1918, wasn't that when the pandemic happened?
Yes, but he was talking about 2018.
Oh, 2018. Okay, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
100 years later.
Sorry, 100 years later. But yeah, no, go on.
Well, sorry, I was just going off on a lecture. I do that.
No. I'm interested. I'm really interested in what you're telling us.
Yeah. So, well, I do want to go back, Steve, to your song, the song that you mentioned a minute ago. That's the song that interested me the most in your album, Devil Put the Coal in the Ground. It's just because, I grew up in southern West Virginia. I left the coal fields when I went to college and got my doctorate and all that. And now I was gone for like 15 years from the coal fields before I returned to teach at a small college there. And the atmosphere had really changed a lot because the unions had just vanished. And they had Friends of Coal was this new thing, and there's Friends of Coal bumper stickers everywhere. The atmosphere had changed a lot in a very short period of time. And people forgot about unions. But also there was this really big tie with God gave us coal. You heard this everywhere. I heard this everywhere. God gave us coal. Coal was a blessing from God. Devil put the coal in the ground, obviously, is this exact opposite message. Well, not necessarily an opposite message, but it's almost like saying it's more trouble than it's worth is kind of what I get from it. What do you... Explain it for me, Steve.
I think you can look at it that way, but it's kind of unfortunate and maybe not very careful writing on my part, because my intention when I wrote the song was just what it's about is that moment when the explosion happens, and what these guys were doing is inherently dangerous, and I think that they took pride in the fact that it was dangerous. So it was just and it was just as in terms of sheer alliteration, a chance to say double dog dare in a song. I just love that. But
courage, devil in the eye.
It's not. It's one side of the coin, but it's also as far as God or the devil, they're both characters and things that I've written. I believe in God, but it's probably my idea of God's different than some people's, but I also believe that God doesn't do parking spaces. And it's like, the older I get, the less I believe that, that God has anything to do with commerce and I'd say, I'm a person in recovery. We're kind of taught to pray for knowledge of God's will for us. And that's it, period. You don't try to get out of trouble, and you don't, I think that song is part of the story. And I think this is part of these 7 songs that I wrote for this show were written for this show, and they're all part of a whole. And it's like, I believe coal's bad for the environment. I also believe that doesn't mean shit in West Virginia. And people the people, and the reason for that is the only people that have anything that anybody ever sees that grows up in the coal fields are people that are working in coal even now. These guys were fucking smart. When they decided they were going to, okay, we're going to do away with the unions once and for all, the first thing they did is they started paying comparable wages to these guys. Now, the shifts became 12 hours, lunch breaks went away. All those things are dangerous. All the things that make a guy, tireder than he was before. And, coal dust is more of a problem than it ever was with a fucking continuous miner running all the time. And Blanc has made this, that's a huge backwards with all this automated, non-regulated, non-union coal mining. Black Lung's taken a huge leap. And I, for me, it was about in West Virginia, they're still getting coal out of the ground. And let's just keep in mind where this coal in this particular story, it wasn't being used to go into coal-fired electricity plants. It's for making steel.
It was meant
it was going on trains and onto ships and going someplace else because we do not make steel in the United States of America. So a friend of mine, his name's Lee Ballinger. He was one of the founders of Rock and Roll Confidential, that paper, and it's called Rock and Rap now. He actually was the guy that did most of the work there when it started out. He wrote a piece recently because he grew up in coal country, and the idea is that we've gotten to a point, this is just like the polarization I was talking about around political party lines. If we either talk about environment or we talk about jobs, and it's either environmentalists don't want to hear about jobs, they want to only hear about the environment. And people that are concerned about putting people back to work, like in an area like West Virginia, where the only job that anybody can get is coal-related, they don't want to hear about the environment because they don't know if they've never witnessed anything in their lives that says there's any other way for them to make a living. We've got to learn to talk about both things at the same time, or we're fucked on both fronts. We'll never do anything about the environment. We'll never return people in West Virginia and Michigan and Minnesota and all those places where all these industrial jobs have gone away, jobs that people without college educations can get in an era when less and less people are actually going to college than ever before. Most kids nowadays are going to do worse than their parents. That's a fact. Mm-hmm. And, we can't fix that unless we're willing to talk about these, ask hard questions and talk about both things at the same time, jobs and the environment, because you can't live if you can't breathe, but you can't live if you can't eat either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I deal with it every day where I'm at. And I've got a book coming out about this, so that deals with these issues. So maybe it provides some answers. We'll find out. Well, let me think here. Let's go. Obviously, there's a lot going on right now. Since you guys have been very conscientious with the issues that you choose, with your art, with your plays, with your music, we're at a kind of a very turbulent time right now. I mean, we've got a pandemic. You've got all of the protests going on. Well, what's your opinion? Just what do you think about these moments in our history right now? Where are we at? How do you feel about what's happening? I'm just interested in your all's thoughts on this.
Well, history doesn't repeat itself; it rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot going on right now with workers. That's very similar to what went on with workers in the early 20th century. There's a lot going on with the economy right now that's very similar to what was going on with the economy during some of the times that we're talking about. So, I think that's happening. But I also think that, like Steve's song, "It's About Blood," can apply to the grief that the country is feeling right now.
Not to put an interpretation on the song that is not what was intended, Steve, but I was looking at the lyrics today because we got our vinyl. And I was like, holy shit, 2/3 of this song could be about Black Lives Matter too.
Right.
Like, you know, because it comes down to the question of people's lives
and their dignity and their grief. And, you know, like that's the bridge that we wanted to build, you know. I think a lot of powers that be have benefited from separating people from each other for a long time. And that's true in you know, in the West Virginia coal fields as well. You know, miners, you know, black miners and white miners were you know.
Well, there was a big lesson in what could happen when people fought side by side.
Right.
Right. And I think that there were some bosses that were like, we're never going to let that happen again.
So those you know, inclinations were exploited, like I think they're being exploited right now. But, you know, the thing that it comes down to is, you know, for us, in terms of the UBB mine disaster or anything that's going on in the world right now, like everybody's got a father, everybody's got a mother, everybody's got a son, and we have to take better care of each other. You know, that's a bridge that can be built through music.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a certain way we're seeing a very stark contrast right now. Like at any other time when there's been an uprising against a system of power, right? Whether that's the mine wars, whether that's 1968, right? Whether it's what's happening right now, you see, we were talking about this morning, you see the extremes on both sides, right? You see the extremes of authoritarianism and violence and what power can do to keep people down, rise up and make itself heard. And you see people in complicated ways working together to fight for something better for themselves and each other also rise up and make itself heard. And I see it as a very stark contrast. There's like violence, authoritarianism, power on one side, and care, protection, safety, human life on the other, right? And you know, I think we keep being shown over and over again, we get to choose which side we're on.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll get Steve, I'll get to you in 1 second. Just to add to that, you mentioned, you know, the different groups coming together. And again, going back to Blair Mountain, and I don't know how well versed you all are in the history behind it. But
we're pretty versed.
We've been researching it a lot recently.
Yeah. Oh, have you? Good. Yeah. Good. That's a plus. That's a plus. As the marchers were moving south towards Blair, building up in numbers, they came upon this little coal camp of Sharples, which I know well. There used to be a high school there. I remember playing sports there when I was a kid. I didn't go there. We played there. But it's one of those, it used to be a town. Now it's nothing. But anyway, as the miners were passing through this town, it was a coal company town. They had a company mess hall, and it was divided into sections. There was a section for the native whites to eat. There was a section for the immigrants to eat in, and then there was a section for the blacks to eat in. And then there was a section at the end, in another room for management, for the supervisors, the company people. Well, when the marchers went through and saw this, they came in and they busted down all the doors, and they forced the company cooks at gunpoint to fix a meal for everybody and serve everybody in the same room.
Wow.
And this is 1921, West Virginia. We're talking about 40 years before Civil Rights Act, generation before desegregation. And the reason I bring that up is they desegregated all the restaurants as they marched south towards Blair Mountain. And this is not something that you hear about. The coal industry, powers that be in West Virginia, worked very hard to destroy this history in our state. They left it out of textbooks. I've got a whole book on this coming out about how it was deliberately taken out, deliberately erased. And of course, they wanted to do the ultimate thing, which was blow up the whole battlefield a few years ago, which we stopped them from doing. But they wanted to erase this history because nothing scares the powers that be more than all those different groups coming together. They don't want that story told. When they want to hear the term redneck, they don't want people to think of miners with red bandanas around their necks fighting for rights. They want you to think of a guy with a pickup truck and a rebel flag screaming "Get her done" as he drives down, the street. That's what they want you to hear. And I think it's important of the play and of the work that Steve's doing is that provides memory, what you're doing, a record for people to remember why things happen. and remember why people need to come together and the consequences of what happens when we forget that history. So,
which puts West Virginia in a really unique position. It's always had a unique position from the moment it was created in American history, the whole reason it exists in the first place. And it's, that's what the light that went off when Jessica and Erik called me is, oh yeah, this is the project I was looking for, to say what I wanted to say personally. And maybe, and the pun is, pardon the pun, but maybe West Virginia is the canary in the coal mine. And that part of the reason I say that is the memory of unionism is still very fresh there. There are people alive now that still remember what it was like before. Once that's gone, another generation goes by and Gary Quarles' generation's gone, then that becomes oral history, not something, that part of the consciousness of the people that are living there now. And so it's crucial. It's a great place to start. I'm been talking about this. I've been talking about coal mining, and I've had to defend, to some people that expect me to say a certain thing and behave a certain way because they feel like this record of mine and the play have a sizable carbon footprint, and that's very narrow. That's a very narrow, like one-dimensional view of this, because the story is the story of people that the only thing they ever saw in their whole lives, that anybody that had anything were people that were working in coal. The other side of that coin, and we do tell this story here, is I think in Coal Crunch, one of my favorite things about it is there aren't that many people working in coal when you get right down to it.
Right.
The first song I wrote when I got home from West Virginia, the first trip, was The Mine. And that was because of a conversation I had with somebody, and I won't say who, that pulled me aside after we had done all the talking about UBB and just said they had heard that I was a recovering addict, and they just wanted to know how I did it because they had somebody in their lives that was struggling with that. And that's where that song came from, when it came right down to it. When you get into the power of unions, it's math. It's like that's why John Henry's there. The idea of juxtaposing one West Virginia story about a man and a big machine against this story of 29 men in a big machine, the continuous miner in a long wall configuration, which is, the union started losing power almost immediately the more mechanized things became in every industry, because there were less people needed to do the same job. Less dues got paid, the power of the union, less people and less jobs that, people that are actually working in coal or steel or whatever. And the power of the union becomes, has been consistently diluted for years and years and years. So, these are complicated questions. There's not, like I said, it's chess, it's not checkers. There's no instant solution to any of this stuff, but forgetting one bit of the history, of the history of coal mining in West Virginia, what that has to do with making steel in Pennsylvania, what that had, our labor movement began in Pennsylvania and West Virginia around steel and coal. It's that simple. And it was imported, and it was because the things that were wrong with the industry in the UK and Ireland and places like that, and parts of Europe, was imported kind of intact. The first miners that came over there, the English miners were the so-called skilled miners, the engineers. The laborers were Welsh and Cornish and Irish. Yeah. That was the first wave of laborers we got over here. That's where the Molly Maguires came from. They also imported the Catholic, Protestant thing with them when they came. Mm-hmm. That confuses that history. But this is, I've been reading about this and writing about it for a long time. It's the very heart of the history of the labor movement, which, my job is like, was invented, the way I do it was invented by Bob Dylan. And he was picking up where Woody Guthrie left off at the very beginning of his career. And so that, I've never separated art and politics. Just wasn't taught that there was any reason to do that. That seems to be a newfangled idea, as far as I can tell. As far as I know, artists are the conscience of the society that they live in.
Right.
That's what I see as my job. And it doesn't mean I am here to entertain. I still write more songs about girls than I do about anything else. And I will probably continue to do so till I die. But I just grew up in an atmosphere where it's okay to write about this stuff. And I'm not necessarily setting out to change the world every time I pick a guitar up, but I am. People don't care what I think. They care about how I feel, because that's what they're going to be able to relate to. And it doesn't mean that intellect doesn't enter into it, but this is about empathy. And that's an emotion. It's not an idea. It's you either feel what somebody's feeling or you don't. And you can think about it all you want to, and that doesn't necessarily get you to empathy. And that's what I love about what I do. Writing songs, you can sing things to people, and if you do it right, and I've made a study of trying to figure out how to go about doing it, you'll piss them off a whole lot less than you do if you just sit and get in their face and start running your mouth talking. It's just one of those things that I learned a long time ago. And part of the reason that I went to West Virginia for the interviews, I didn't interview anybody, but I talk like this, and it helped. That's one of those things. And I don't. It's that I don't think I met anybody from West Virginia in this process that didn't own Copperhead Road at one point in their lives. So
right.
that gave me an in, and immediately what I felt from that is, I don't think artists have a responsibility to comment on the society they live in. I think not everybody's good at it, and people that aren't good at it probably shouldn't try, because you'll fuck it up. It's not easy to do, but I can do it. And what I do automatically speaks to this part of the country. And therefore I immediately felt a responsibility to do it because I could. And so there was nothing for me to do but extrapolate it into a 10-cut record. And I put songs aside. I'm releasing a song like tonight, probably around midnight, that I wrote that was supposed to be the centerpiece of the next record I was going to make. And I wrote it at the beginning of this presidency, and it's called Times Like These. And there's a version of it that the band recorded already in the can. But I listened to the demo the other night. We're going to release the band version later, but I want it out there now. So I'm going to the studio, and as soon as I get off of this call, and I'm going to record it and put it up. And my radio show this week, begins with, and this comes from what we did in this play, begins with the names of, it's what NPR referred to as a non-comprehensive list of everyone killed by police since Eric Garner up to this Floyd murder. And I read every one of those names to start the show out. And then I play Paul Robeson. So it's, the whole show's about that. And I'm premiering the track at the end of it. And it's all hands on deck. I have to be heard in this. But one thing I stumbled across just running my mouth in the show is I said that watching that video was hard for me because I actually know what it feels like to be choked unconscious by a police officer. It happened to me in Dallas in 1987. And I was trying to get a friend of mine that worked for me that had too much to drink into a cab, a New Year's Eve gig. We were opening for Carl Perkins. This is the only thing I was ever charged with that I didn't fucking do. And and I almost went to prison for it. I'm trying to get him in the car. A police officer thought he was seeing something that he wasn't. He was off duty in his Dallas uniform at moonlighting. He took a nightstick and he threw it around my neck. And he's standing on a high curb behind me. And my mother and father were standing there. My oldest son, who was 6 at the time, and my soon-to-be fourth wife, but we're sitting there. And the guy cranked me up and lifted me off of my feet because he was standing on about an 8 or 10-inch curb, and choked me completely unconscious with a bar hole with a nightstick across my neck, which was illegal even then. But he choked me out. I lost consciousness. When I fell backwards on him. He wasn't as big as I was. And of course that banged him up a little bit. He lost control of the nightstick, blood starts rushing back into my brain. So I started flopping around. That's what happens. You convulse. So he choked me unconscious a second time.
Wow.
And I both times thought, I'm going to die here. So I did know what that felt like when he was laying there. I literally said, I can't breathe. And I never knew whether anybody could hear me or not because I wasn't getting very much breath out. Then I played a set of music, and then I came back and I thought about it while the set was playing, and I said, what I don't know what it feels like. In a long time, for 25 years, I've been sober. I don't ever do anything illegal anymore. So I don't look behind me looking for cops anymore. I did it one time in my life, but it's because of my own shit. I don't know what it feels like. I don't think that's the experience that any African-American has living in this country today.
Right.
So we can relate to what we can relate to, and we can use that. But it's really important to remember, I supported Bernie Sanders in the first cycle. I had a chance to support somebody. I joined the Democratic Party which I'd never done before, because you have to be a member of the party to vote in a primary in New York. I thought it was important. I didn't know whether he would get elected or not. That was neither here nor there. But I felt it was important, and it was a candidate that thought like I did on most cases. He was done when he made the public statement that when confronted by somebody from Black Lives Matter, when he said, it's not really about race, it's about class. That's only fucking true if you're white. And until we have to identify these differences between us, in West Virginia, New York, wherever, we have to understand what we have in common. And we also have to be very careful and make sure that we understand, what isn't our experience, and not assume that the experience is the same for people that don't look like we do, especially anybody of color in this country. It's way over 50% of the people that die at the hands of police, are African American. And compare that to the percentage of the population. That math doesn't fucking add up. It never has.
Right. Well, it's a lot to chew on. No, I'm appreciate you getting all that out. And Steve, I don't want to keep you from recording music. So if you're going to leave here and go make more, I don't think I should stop you or hold you back for a moment. And I think we've already gone about 45 minutes now. So I greatly appreciate you guys coming on here and taking the time out in this chaotic moment that we're living through to talk to me about this. And we hope that maybe next year, when we do the 100th anniversary of Blair Mountain, that you guys can come down. I'd love to see the play at some point. I'd love to see it here in West Virginia. And
that will happen. I mean, if nothing else happens, we will get to play to West Virginia. We decided that a long time ago.
Okay, well, great. Great. Well, I'm looking forward to that. And you guys be safe out there, and hope you do well the rest of the summer. And again, thanks so much for joining me on this. I greatly appreciate it.
And I promise we will be in West Virginia next summer with the tour and with the band. I'm gonna tour to support this record until everybody gets to see the show and everybody gets to hear it.
Yeah.
Great.
And thank you for your work.
Yeah, really. It's very important. And, it's like, I've always been fascinated by people like Alan Lomax, who went around and collected stories and collected information.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all share that, all of us, all four of us together.
Right.
That's it's nice to come together that way.
Yeah, it's great to be able to have these conversations. And even if we're cooped up inside, at least we can have a dialogue. And I think that's what your all's work is about, too, is expanding that dialogue. So that's great. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks. See you guys.
See you later,
Bye.
Steve.
See you later.
Good to see you.